We're just going to give Ron a little welcoming here. Ron has been a CEO, group president, CEO, VP sales, at marketing and policy level, senior executive for Emphasis, Rockwell Automation, Celestica, HP, General Electric, Wells Fargo Security Services, and EG&G. He founded International Harbor LLC in 2003 with two partners. They have three business lines: turnaround and achieving next level business growth with a focus on sales, marketing, operations, and supply chain. 2, setting up businesses and operations in China. 3, helping companies prepare for and raise capital. International Harbor LLC operates in 4 independent stages that lead into each other: business physical exam, assessment, and 360-degree analysis for business customers, owners, employees, partners, and suppliers. 2, development of detailed action plan as a consultant. 3, implementation as a permanent hire or contractor, and post-implementation management, usually as a board of director role. So please welcome Ron.
Thank you very much. So a couple of hours ago, my wife said to me, "So what are you talking on today?" And I said, "I'm talking on portfolio management." And she said, "You're going to talk about investments?" So if you came here because that's what you thought this was going to be about, then you're in the wrong room. Okay, let me start by just giving you a little overview. Can you hear me in the back okay? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about setting a strategy for your company and implementing a portfolio approach to putting it in place and then to reaping the benefits. So we're going to talk about ways to target customers and decision makers, about why your positioning and determining your offerings are critical to your growth, what you offer and how you position them, and then how to create compelling value propositions. So before I get into the presentation, I thought it would be helpful to ask you all to see if you can answer the question, what's the next number in this sequence? If you have it, if you think you got it, just raise your hand or shout out. Anybody? It does. It does. So having been a math major when I was in undergraduate school, my initial approach to solving this was to try to come up with some mathematical sequence that would enable me to figure out the next term. If that's the approach you're taking, I will tell you right off the bat, it's the wrong approach. Okay, I'll give you the answer. I don't have any paper, so I can't write it. But I'll verbally, yeah, I'm not sure they'll see that though. I'll write it, but I'm not sure you're going to, over here I can write it, okay. I need to look at it to write it. Can you see that? I'll read it to you. 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. Does that help anybody? All right. So let me tell you how you get the answer to this. The way you get the answer to this is you look at the numbers that are on the page and you simply state how many numbers of each type are there. Right? So there's 1, 3, there's 1, 1, there's 2 2s, and there's 2 1s. Now, why did I put this up as the first thing to show you in talking about portfolio management? That's exactly right. Each of us has a history, an experience base, and a knowledge that whenever we look at something is in the background. And whether we realize it or not, how we look at those things is dependent on that background. The first time I saw this, what struck me was that the simplicity of this, at the same time, not any way that I would have looked at. And I want you to think about that because you'll bring those same prejudices, assumptions, experiences when you look at portfolio management and when you look at business creation. And if you take nothing else away from this pitch in terms of how do you benefit and how do you win, it's listen to your customers. All the rest of it is how to do that. But at the end of the day, you need to listen to your customers and you need to observe your customers because you'll learn more not by what they say, but what they do and how they behave about how you can help them. And at the end of the day, if you can figure out how to help them, you will be successful with your business. If you can't, you're going to struggle. Okay, so the agenda is going to talk first about being customer driven, and then setting a growth strategy, and then the value propositions based on business drivers, and an example of that, some success stories that drive business value, and a snapshot statement, a crisp statement of how to capture all of what we talk about into a single page, and then a growth checklist. Now, let me talk about being customer driven. I differentiate between being customer responsive and being customer driven. To me, customer responsive is when you are responding to something the customers are asking of you. Customer driven is when you are making decisions and taking actions because you've determined it's in the best interest of your customer. And so if in your company, everyone says, whenever something is being proposed, will that benefit our customers? Then you have the culture you want. If they say, will that benefit us? Then you need to start thinking about is it the culture you really want to have. So how do you be customer driven? The first piece of that is understand your customer's business. Not your business, their business. Understand what makes them successful and understand what problems they have. And if you can figure that out, then you can figure out a way to come up with a solution to those problems that will help them. I had one situation where I was working for a big electronic contract manufacturing company, and I had been brought in as an executive with the objective of setting up some businesses that would be more profitable for the company, because if you know contract manufacturing, it works on very thin margins. And so they wanted to get into some businesses that had higher profit margins to complement that. Well, we had a printed circuit board layout business. And I went to see our customers and was talking with them about it. And I ended up talking with engineering managers from several fairly significant companies in the electronics and telecom space. And I was talking with one of them, and he looked at me and he said, you know, you do a really good job of printed circuit board layout, but there are 200 companies out there that do that. And yeah, you're going to get your fair share or more than your fair share of our business in that because you're good, we like you, and we have the relationship. But my problem is I have to build 10 new products this year for my company. And I only have the engineering capacity to build 6 of them. If you could help me figure out how to build that 7th one, that would really be valuable to me. So what did I do? I went back to my company and I said, well, what do we need to have in place in order to be able to help him build that next product? Well, we had internally new product introduction capabilities. We had environmental RoHS we type of capabilities. We had all kinds of project management capabilities. And we had the printed circuit board business. So we acquired another company that had some value engineering capability, put this all together to form this business. Our first customer was Juniper. They wanted to build a new enterprise router to compete with Cisco. We built it, we designed it, we built it. They beat Cisco to market by 6 months with the router. That generated $50 million of business for them by beating them in that 6-month period. There wasn't anything we could do with printed circuit board manufacturing that have anywhere near that kind of an impact on us. So that's what I mean when I say listen to your customers, figure out what their problems are, and figure out how to solve those problems. It will create a successful business. Setting your growth strategy. It's my experience that if you don't have a goal, anywhere you end up is okay. I'm a very, very strong believer in setting a target and then saying, how am I going to get to that target? And then measuring how you're doing to get to that target. So I believe that the first part of your growth strategy is to define the goal. The second is to review the current situation. How are you today? I call that the business physical exam. Just like you go to a doctor on an annual basis or every 2 years, once every 2 years, to see how your physical health is, not because you're sick, not because there's something bothering you, you just want to check up. Your business should be doing the same thing. And I will tell you now that it's my experience that if you don't have an outside party that is not part of the company doing it, you're not necessarily going to get objective feedback. And that review needs to review everything. It needs to review your customers, it needs to review your suppliers, your partners, the executive management, the middle management, and your employees. I had another situation where we were brought in by a label manufacturing company that was privately owned. They had been doing $20 million of business and they had shrunk to $16 million of business. And they needed to get back to $20 million because it was owned by 6 families and all their kids were in the business. And this was how they were all going to make money. So they brought us in to take a look at what could be done. We did the business physical exam. We found out 2 things. We found out, number one, that many of their customers had moved operations to Mexico. And as a result, didn't believe this company could support them in Mexico and weren't asking them to bid on the business that was being done in Mexico. The second thing we found out was that they had a transaction-based sales force. So they had never built account relationships with these companies, and therefore they didn't know this was going on. At the end of the day, they involved us with helping them figure out an action plan and moving forward. In 15 months, they were doing 23 million. That's from 16 million. And that's because we figured out what their problem was. And we didn't figure out their problem by talking to the people in the company. We figured out the problem by talking to their customers. So identify opportunities for growth along dimensions of customer targets, customer needs, and offerings, and we'll talk more about that. Define the value propositions that will help your customers. The thing that I find, and I'll show you when I get to a slide that shows you value propositions, is that most people who are trying to sell something think of the value proposition in terms of what it's going to save the company or their customer. The most powerful and helpful thing you can do for one of your customers is not save them money, but figure out how you can help them generate more money. If you can do that, they'll turn that into a profit level that will far surpass any cost savings activity you can do. We had a situation with Chrysler where we were brought in to take a look at them starting up a new minivan plant. And every single plant that they had started up came in at least 6 months late. And so their objective was to come in on time. Our job was to manage all the subcontractors involved in setting up that plant in a way that we brought it in on time. I won't go through the details of how we did it, but we were successful at doing that. It came in on time. And at the party, when it was kicked off, the president of the division came there because it was the first time, remember, that they'd ever brought one in on time. And he said that by bringing this plant in on time, rather than 6 months late the way they usually do it, generated for the company $250 million of profit. $250 million of profit. There's no way we could have done anything that would have generated that kind of profit by a cost savings action. That money came from their ability to sell those cars. Develop marketing, sales, partnerships, and acquisitions to provide a complete offering. So the concept here is figure out what the customer needs, figure out what you have, figure out the solution you need to give them, and then figure out how you're going to get the pieces you don't have. Also, target the decision makers. I can't tell you how many people I have worked with over the years who come in with a belief that they are really going to win this business, and in the end of the day, they're not even close. And the reason is that they're not talking to the decision maker. They're talking to an influencer or a recommender, and they don't understand the difference. You got to figure out who gets to write the check, who gets to sign it and approve it. That's the person you got to get to. And then implement marketing and sales actions to get there. So, I talked about a business physical exam. This is some of the components. From a customer, how are you viewed by them? Are you meeting their needs? From a business goals, are you on track to achieve them? From concerns, will your action plans address what you are concerned about? Will you get the top line growth? Are you achieving your cost savings goal? And are you winning? That's the things that you want to be asking yourself when you're looking at your company to say, how are we doing today? Define the goal. Have a clear line of sight. I don't know how many of you sat in a room like this, but I know I have several times. And it's a fundamental belief at the top that you can really take something that's going like that and just make it skyrocket up. Right? All the plans, all the forecasts are built around that, and then when they don't happen, everybody is in crash mode. Or I don't know how about you, but I certainly felt like that before. Okay, so in portfolio management, what we're going to try to focus on, as we talk about a little further, though, is to make sure that the portfolio we're working on is aligned strategically with what our company wants to do. We're going to then look at, is the portfolio that will maximize the value for the company? I have seen businesses fail because they maximized sales, they didn't maximize return. And the cost to maximize the sales resulted in them almost writing checks every time they sold something. Balance that aligns with your strategy. So look at the time to profit. Look at the market you're in. Look at the technologies. Look at the risk. And then optimizing your resources. You've got so many resources, you want to put them on the places that will give you the best return. Okay, so how do we grow? In my experience, you think about growth along 3 dimensions. One is you can grow something by adding new customers. Now, how do you add new customers? You can add new customers by going to a geography you're not in now. You can add new customers by going into an industry or an account that you're not in now. You can add new customers by signing up partners who can give you access to customers. The second way is new offerings. You can take what you're offering and you can change it. I described an example a little earlier about one that we did. But you can look at your offerings and say, what are the new offerings I can provide in addition to the ones I currently have? And then for your current offerings, you want to take them and go after new customers, and you also want to look at how you're going to market with them. You want to look at, can you bundle them? Can you attach them? Can you price them differently? There's a whole slew of things that you can look at that will help you increase your business and increase your profits if you look at it along that dimension. The next thing is to look at it along the 4 elements in the box. If you look at this as sales or solutions, and you look at this as customers, and you say, okay, these are existing solutions to existing customers, existing solutions to new customers, new solutions to existing customers, new solutions to new customers. If you think about what you're doing along those dimensions, what you'll find is the majority of people spend a lot of their time here. And when they try to figure out how to grow, that's where they're putting a lot of their energy and effort. For every dollar they spend, 85 cents gets spent over in this box. This is the place that will have the lowest profit. If you can take these and go to new customers, your profitability is going to increase, and it's tangential. It's an easier thing to do. if you can take existing customers and then throw out a new solution. Again, you've got one of those two dimensions is something that you know. It's someone you know. It's either the offering or the customer. This is the most costly sales you can make. It's also the most profitable. So when you think about portfolio management, I would encourage you to look at it along these dimensions and look at when you do your business development activities, do you have balance? Are you focused on the areas that will give you the best return? In terms of customers' needs, I said this a little earlier, so I think I'll go through quickly. Understand their business and their competitors, how they win business, what are their strategic problems, what has the biggest impact on them achieving their business goals, and what's the financial benefit to them of solving that problem. Remember what I said. If you start with the customer, you figure out the solution you need to provide them, then you look at what you have the capability of doing, and then you have to add to that. Now you can add in multiple ways. You can add because you need to get access to a market that you don't have the ability to access. I was at HP, and we were trying to sell our computers to run the manufacturing control systems of manufacturing facilities, of plants. There was no way that a manufacturing company was going to buy a manufacturing control system from us. We were a computer company. We didn't know anything about that. We didn't have dirty fingernails. So what did we do? We signed agreements with Allen Bradley, GE Fanuc, Westinghouse Automation, and the agreement said that they would use our technology inside their control systems, and they would sell those to the plant. They became our sales channel. They gave us the market access. They had the best-in-class expertise because they were the leaders in the world. They had much more global coverage than we would have had trying to do this. As a result of that, we then were able, when we captured customers, to take the information that was in those control systems and bring that up to applications for quality management, for maintenance, for connecting into the ERP systems. So we then were able to sell behind that a whole slew of our product and solutions once we got those into one of their clients. We grew that business in 3.5 years from about 50 million to 500 million. Now, HP was able to scale, clearly, but because we didn't have to sell it, right? We just had to support those partners in selling. Okay. So here's some examples of what I mean when I say customer driven. If anyone on there strikes your fancy, yell out which one and I'll tell you the story. Pardon? Okay. So in the IT outsourcing business, over a 6-year period, we took this business from 160 million to 800 million. We started the business when we decided we wanted to get into outsourcing. And the first work we did was to do backup sites, data centers, network communications. Those were the three product lines. Okay. We then added a fourth one, help desks. We started that business and we tried to expand it geographically first. So I took it to Asia. Another guy took it to Europe, and we started to grow the business. In a year and a half, I took what was a $15 million business and grew it to a $40 million business in Asia. And we did it by how we approached the market and using some of the same techniques I just described earlier. Okay? So that was the first stage. That allowed us to get the business up from about 160 million to about 230 million. We then made the decision that we were going to expand and go into 4 business lines. We were going to go after the desktop, which was a big area at the time. We were going to continue to do the businesses we had. We were going to go after the ERP infrastructure environments. And SAP was the big player, so we started with SAP environments. And we were going to go after, because it was in the .com era, we were going to go after internet infrastructure, which a lot of these .com companies didn't have, couldn't afford, and were looking to figure out how to outsource. For us, that was a real challenge because the internet infrastructure business was a portfolio management business, right? Because a lot of those companies were so small, we were betting on whether or not they'd make it. So we had to sort of manage that in a portfolio way that said if 3 out of 10 made it, then we were going to be fine. But we had to set up a mechanism by which we could track and manage our business in that way, as a portfolio. In the ERP infrastructure business, we really needed a big gun with us. So we signed a joint agreement with Accenture. And the 2 of us would go after that business. In the desktop and help desk business, we had a business in another part of the company that we moved over, and it was really growing quickly, but it was losing money. So we took these 4 pieces and we put them together. So what do we have? We had one business that was growing about 25-30% a year, that was generating about 12% profit. We had a second business that was growing at about 100% a year and losing money. We had 2 new businesses. That was our portfolio that we created. Right? After 1 year, what happened? Well, the business that was growing 30% grew another 30%. The business that was growing and losing money was now losing more money. The 2 new businesses hadn't made much progress because every time they won a project, they had to run in and do the project. And therefore, they weren't able to win enough business. So after looking at this, we said, this isn't going to work. We need to change our business model. We need to have a centralized infrastructure. And we need to set these up as lines of businesses whose job it is to go get the business and have this infrastructure capable of delivering it. And so that's what we did. And we created one centralized infrastructure, which enabled us to actually reduce our cost structure by about $40 million. We set these up as individual places to go sell. And we were able to grow the business to about $600 million with a net 10% profit. So we were doing great, right? And then the CEO of the company came to us and said, I really like what you've done. You've now got a business that's growing. You've got a business that's making good profit, but you're much too small for us. You have to get much bigger. You need to become a bigger part of our company. So we took a look at it and we said, okay, how are we going to grow this? Well, our average contract was a 3-year contract for about $4 or $5 million. You got to sell a lot of those to really grow the business. What we realized was there's only one way we could give the company the kind of growth it wanted. And that was to change the kind of business projects we went after. So now we suddenly decided we're going to now bid on projects that are $100 million contracts, go for 7 years or 10 years. Easier said than done. When you bid on a $100 million contract in IT outsourcing and you come in second, you spend $2 million and got nothing for it. You better learn real quickly how to play in that game. And we had to do that. We set up a whole system of managing throughout the selling process, having the delivery involved so we can make sure we could deliver things on time at what we said we were going to deliver it for, figuring out how to target decision makers. We made that change, and in 1 year, we won 3 projects, one for $400 million, one for $500 million, and one for $200 million. And then we won 17 other projects, all greater than $20 million. So in that 1 year, we took a $600 million business to $800 million in 12 months. But there was no way we could have done that had we not completely changed the business model. And I tell you that story, and I know it's long-winded, but I tell it to you for a reason. If you're in business, the most important thing you need to understand is you can't be complacent. You have to always look at where you are and what's going on and how are you going to change to make it better. We went through several iterations to go from 160 million to 800 million. There wasn't one thing that got us there. But it was a planned approach where we figured out what we were trying to do and we executed on it. Any others? Number 2. Create high-profit businesses in a low-margin contract. I told you about one of the businesses we created, that engineering business, right? Where we went from a printed circuit board design business to actually designing new products for companies and building them. The second business that we went into there was a supply chain, actually a fulfillment business, a global fulfillment business. And what was going on is the telecom companies and the electronics companies really wanted somebody to be able to move the product from their facilities where they made them to their customers as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. So that's the business we went into, because we were doing it for ourselves. We knew how to do that. And we ended up creating 3 pipes, a direct pipe, so if the product could go right to the customer, it went boom, right to the customer. We took another pipe that said if you have to do some changing of adding paper or combining components to configure it, that was a second pipe. And those went to a distribution center where we did that. And then the third pipe was something where it required some customization, some work that had to be done in order to get the product finished. To get into that business, we built a $500,000 square foot warehousing capability in Long Beach, California. Can anyone tell me why? Most of this stuff is being manufactured where? In Asia. How do people move material from Asia to the United States? Where do those boats land? Long Beach, California. Wasn't a rocket scientist to figure out where you needed to put this. So that was the second business that we created. The third business that we created was a customer support business. We had been repairing product that we had manufactured and sold. We were manufactured for companies. They would sell the product and there would be repairs needed. They'd send it back to us and we repair it. We had great reverse logistics capabilities, right? We had great repair capabilities. So what we said is, why don't we extend this to be really not just a reverse logistics repair site, but an actual customer support site with call centers, with field service people can go out to the sites and work on stuff, with the ability to give feedback to our customers about the designs and the product failures so that they could change their engineering. So we built that capability and we grew that business. The fourth business that we went into was we were filling the ink cartridges for HP. Right? So they would send us the ink cartridge, we would fill it with the ink, and then ship it out. We had locations around the world doing this. And when I looked at the business, I said, this isn't going to go any faster than HP goes, right? So, how can we really grow this thing? What I found out was that the equipment we were using to fill that cartridge with ink, we designed, we built, and then we only sold the use of it. So I said, well, why don't we do that for other companies? So we got a contract for RFID tags with Symbol. We got a contract with fuel cells from I can't remember the name, but we got a contract for that. We took what was a $25 million business going nowhere in terms of growth, and in 1 year, it was doing $75 million. And it was making a lot more money than it was making before. Those were the four businesses that we built. We also sold our plastics business. We had a business that made plastic components. And what we found was the business wasn't competitive. And so we divested ourselves of that. In a 12-month period, we formed this group of businesses, created them, and when we formed them from components inside the company. It was put together, an initial business level was about $800 million, and 12 months later it was doing $1 billion a year. And that business was generating profit margins 5 times the level of the core business. You want to take one more, or should I keep going? Yes. So this. I told a little bit about that before, where we sold our product to to the Allen Bradleys and the GE Fanuc. But what we decided when we wanted to get into that business, the strategy that we developed was, it is extremely costly at the factory level. Every time you add a piece of equipment, or every time you put in a new application, to make those work. Because at that point in time, when we were doing this, every one of those connections was a point-to-point connection. Right? An APL was written that would go point-to-point. So think about this. You have 25 pieces of equipment in your plant. You're bringing in a new software application that needs to run across. You got to write 25 of these things. Right? Or you have 30 applications. You just bring in a new piece of equipment. You got to write 30 of those. So what we decided to do was to build a middleware package that was an interpreter that would allow you to write to that. So if you had an application, you wrote the application to that middleware. If you had a piece of equipment, you wrote the connector to that. So now, if you have 30 applications, you bring in a new piece of equipment, they were all written once to that interpreter. This piece of equipment went right in and started working on all 30. So that was, for us, a real cost driver and a time to market for them, because the implementation times dropped dramatically. So that was one of the things we did. The second thing we did was we went to these companies and we signed agreements and got our products integrated them. The third thing we did is we built expertise centers by industry verticals around the world, and we networked them together. So we had a set of automotive centers, one in Turin, Italy, right, Fiat, one in Detroit. We had one in Germany, and I think we had one in the UK. Networked them together and set it up so that you could do a demonstration for a customer at any one of those. And we staffed them with knowledgeable experts in that industry. So we started bringing customers into these expertise centers and showing them solutions and capabilities. The combination of those three things enabled us to move this business from, I think we started about 150, 175 million, and in 3 years it was doing 500 million. Okay? I just described several scenarios. What I think we might, how much time do we have? One? All right. I'm going to try this. I don't know if this will work or not. Let's pick one that we haven't talked about. 12? Okay. So here's the scenario. Your company sells control and safety systems into the nuclear sector, for nuclear plants. Okay? The people who build nuclear plants hire someone to build a plant. They don't hire somebody to build the safety system and somebody else to build, this piece of equipment or that. So you're selling to, not the end user, but you're selling to the three companies in the world that build nuclear plants. Okay? A bid comes up in China. China plans to build 12 nuclear plants in the next 5 years and 25 in the next 10 years. Now, I don't know how many of you have done business with China, but the way they tend to operate in these kinds of environments is they set a budget, they set a time frame, and they go hell-bent for leather to get there. Right? So the question of whether or not this was going to happen or money was going to be spent was much less risky than in other parts of the world. To contrast that with the United States. The United States had 35 nuclear power plants approved. Approved. The money was there, and they were approved. They couldn't implement one of them. There wasn't a place in this country that wanted a nuclear plant built near them. So at any rate, so that's the story. That's the scenario, the problem. The goal clearly is, I want to grow my nuclear business. What would you do? Sorry?
Go to the business, go where it's at. Go to Asia.
You go to Asia and do what?
Talk to the folks that
Sell
build
to
it.
one of the companies that's building over there.
Right. You have to go to the people who build the plants because they're going to be your customers, not China, not wherever, right? So you got to find out who's building those plants in China, who's going to win that business, right? So we did that. The other thing we did when we did our assessment was we talked with the Chinese about what their objectives were. And it turns out that they wanted to build the capability internally in China to build nuclear plants. That wasn't a surprise, if you think about it. So, how are they going to learn to build nuclear plants? They're not going to learn to build nuclear plants by hiring a company to come in and build a nuclear plant for them. So they determine what are the most critical components in a nuclear plant. And in a nuclear plant, the control systems and the safety systems are pretty critical components. And so they said to us, we'll give you a contract directly for these plants, independent of who's building the rest of the plant, on one condition, that there's a transfer of intellectual capital to us to learn how to do that ourselves. So what would you do? With? So you would go after the business and do that?
Go to the State Department. Yeah, you got it. You got to clear it through U.S. government.
Yeah.
Still work with the three businesses, though.
I'm sorry? You can do that, but it doesn't bypass the laws or any of that stuff, actually. What we ended up doing was taking on contracts to build the safety and control systems for the plants with an agreement that we would use a certain percentage of our labor to be Chinese labor. And that effectively the way that the intellectual capital or that knowledge would transfer is these people working on these projects would learn it. And the one thing about the Chinese is they have a lot of patience. They look out over a long period of time. So this was a strategy where we were not breaking any of the laws because we were doing the work and we were the contractor. You know, we had to get all the export, license and all that stuff, but we were the ones doing it. We weren't outwardly transferring secrets or knowledge. But over a 10 or 15 year period, they would build up enough knowledge and capability, at least they thought they would, to be able to start to do some of this on their own. And that's the agreement that we signed. As a result of that, we signed our first contract for 4 plants, which was a $300 million contract. And since then, the company has signed 2 more contracts for $300 million each for more plants. The solution that we came up with was one where we were able to meet and leverage what they wanted to have happen, and at the same time, go direct. We bypassed the bidding process of those 3 companies that deliver those plants. We were able to make a lot more profit on that business than we ever would have been able to had we gone through those, been a subcontractor to those companies. We got into China, so we got visibility to what they were doing and we were able to grow it.
I'll get back up just a second. What was your relationship with the actual builder of the plant, one of those 3 companies? So how did you?
The way the contracts were written with China is China wrote the contract with the nuclear plant builder that said, you will use this company's safety and control systems in your plant. So we had to work with them, but they didn't get to choose. They didn't get to set pricing.
Those companies have their own safety controls.
Yes, they do. Some of them do. Most of them don't, because the guys who build the plants aren't interested in safety control systems. The amount of that $300 million for 4 plants, those guys are going after the $12 billion those 4 plants cost. Okay? Value propositions. I think it's important to understand who the person is you're selling to and what's valuable to them. And what I just tried to do on this chart was to say, look, if the person making the decision on what you're trying to sell is the CFO, then these are some of the things they're going to be thinking about. If the person is the VP of operations, they're going to be thinking about different things. If they're the head of engineering or the head of maintenance or the head of customer sales or marketing, each of them have different things that are important to them. And so when you're developing a value proposition that you're trying to convince somebody to buy from you, the first step is to figure out who's making that decision. What kind of value proposition is going to get them excited? And then couch your value proposition in these terms.
Aren't all of those people going to be involved in the decision?
Depends on what you're selling. Depends on what you're selling. I'll give you an example. We wanted to, the cost of a manufacturing plant, the maintenance, the cost of maintaining the equipment in a manufacturing plant is typically about 40% of the plant overall spend each year. Okay? If you employ different techniques for doing maintenance, like planned maintenance, that can drop from 40% to 25%. If you employ predictive maintenance techniques, where you're predicting failures of equipment and only bringing it down for repair before it breaks down when it makes sense, that number can drop to 15%. Those are big numbers for a plant. So you're trying to sell maintenance control systems, you would be selling it to this department. The minute you can change that to be a predictive maintenance system, you're selling to him or her. Changes the game. This guy's always thinking about how much he got in his budget to spend, right? That person's looking at, if I can reduce my plant cost by 10%, are you kidding me? So it really depends on what it is you're selling, how you're going at it. And the second element about a value proposition is, I found it to be most effective when I could couch the value proposition in terms of the financial statements of my client. Not how I could save them costs or reduce their costs, but show them on their P&L the impact. So here's an example, right, where we took their P&L statement, we had a solution we were offering them. This was the places that it would impact them. This is what it did in order to get the benefit. This is the investment that we were selling at a level that the CFO and the CEO were going to want to sign off on it. This is the kind of stuff they understand. So, statements like increased product throughput by 40%. What does that mean? That means we took the same amount of product that they had to manufacture and did it in 60% of the time. That's not cost reduction. That's not cost savings. That's business they're going to generate with that other 40%. So when you talk to them about it, you're not just talking about the fact that you've shortened the time and that you've reduced the cost. You also talk about the fact that they're going to generate more business, and that's going to generate more profit. And now that value proposition has a lot more power. So I just have some examples up there. When you're marketing, again, market to the decision maker. Right? Figure out who is going to be the person that signs off on the order. And then figure out who are the people that influence that. Most of the time, if there's been a committee formed, the committee is not the decision maker. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen the committee be the decision maker. The committee is the recommender. And then there are people in a company who have a lot of power, either positional or just because they've been with the company and they know the owner, whatever the reason. Those are the influences. What you got to figure out is who they are, and you got to build those relationships, but you also have to figure out who is the one whose name is going to go on it at the end of the day when the contract is signed. I'm going to go through this quickly because we're going to run out of time. But these are just approaches. Remember what I said. Think about it along the 4 dimensions. Existing customers, existing solutions. New customers, existing solutions. New solutions, existing customers. And new solutions, new customers. And then build sales tools to go after each of those areas based on what you're going to provide. And these are just some examples of in places that I've worked where we've done it. Then look at the commercial programs you're going to put in place to go after that. And one of the most effective ways to go after new customers is to create a target list of value proposition and decision makers, identify them, and then identify strategic projects for that company. One of the things that I have found is that success story or reference selling is the most effective tool in being successful. If you're interested, I have a book here that I created when I was at Rockwell that is simply a list of success stories. And each of them has these 4 elements. What the business was, what the challenge was, what the solution was, and what the benefit or impact was. And I can tell you that once we created this book, we could go into customers, and this was organized by industry, and we go into a customer and say, if you're in the forest products, take a look at this. And they would see several different companies that we were able to create very tangible benefits to. Now, they may not have needed any of the things that were in here, but this is a very effective tool in selling. So I really believe that it's important in your business to create success stories. If you can get the people to be references, if you can get them to talk about it and give you quotes, more the better. So this is a cartoon for the times. Remember what I said. Whatever you're doing should be simple enough you can put it on one page. Here's a page. It gives the revenue, it gives the forecast or plan in terms of the numbers. It talks about what the current strategy is, talks about what your future strategy is, it defines the value proposition, it identifies who the decision maker is. And it has a success story right at the bottom. So I'll go back and end with the checklist. Have you identified your target customers? Have you identified the customer need you're going to solve? Have you developed a solution that you need to solve it? Do you know the target decision makers? Have you created the quantified value proposition? Have you selected the growth approach sequence in terms of target customers and offerings? Have you created the business model, sales, and marketing tools required? And do you have the success stories to reference sell? I think that if you can do that, this is how you'll see yourself. Thank you. Any questions?
Can you give a soft copy of your presentation?
I'll send a copy to Renee,
I have a copy.
and I'll send you the one to tomorrow. You can get it from there. Okay? Or give me your card and I'll send it to you either way.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to send it, it's not a problem.
Email.
Are you involved or looking at any of the, like solar energy or any of the new technologies to make us more energy efficient in any of those industries?
I'm not currently involved in those. About 18 months ago, I was working with a company that was trying to do solar energy. Fundamentally, there were some basic problems that would hinder the growth that combined with that stuff, and it had more to do with the cost of power generation versus actually generating is really the big cost in those things. And these companies were too small; they didn't have the wherewithal to do that, so they had to figure out how to sign up with somebody to, where they was. So what that did is took a marketplace that should be wide open and constricted them to places where the power generation was already in place. That was the first thing. The second thing was there were a number of legal things that had to be overcome, and it was moving very slowly. So my conclusion when I looked at it was that while I thought it was the right way to go, I didn't see it happening. I saw it being very slow to move forward.
First is an observation and a question. When you're talking about knowing your customer and the organization, one of the things that we've learned in our business is the art of political mapping. Because in an organization, if you don't know where the allies are and your enemies and the people who are neutral, as you navigate the organization, you really don't know where the pluses and minuses are going to be. So it's good to do that mapping to know what departments you're going to be viewed as being unfriendly to, and which ones you're going to be very much supported by. The other thing too is how do you see this working in an economy today? Like today everybody's very risk averse, and the biggest competition out there is do nothing.
Right.
Where people say, I'm going to stay within my boundaries here and just stay the course, but not take anything, no new product, no new services. Buy from my trusted suppliers today. How do you unseat them? How do you break the paradigm?
The only thing that I know that works is to create a crisis. What happens today is people get complacent and they get acceptance of less growth, lower profitability, and that's okay. Right? And it varies dramatically in my experience on the size of company. The small to mid-sized companies are much more guilty of that than the larger companies who are really trying to figure out how to do something. The problem is that they don't have clear answers, and because of the risk, there has to really be a clear value proposition that's going to want it. But for the small and mid-sized companies, it really becomes a crisis situation. That crisis can happen because there's a change in ownership. That crisis could happen because they lose a major customer. There could be a lot of different ways. One of the things that I have found helpful is this idea of this business physical exam. Because if you can go to them and identify some low-hanging fruit that they can, do something with and without a lot of pain and get some benefit from, and you can identify some fundamental issues that they can react to, then you have a better chance. Did that answer your question? You and then you.
See, I have a client that does the exact same thing. They are so risk adverse that they do nothing. And in doing nothing, they've increased their risk. So what we have done is we've turned around and said, this is what you did, here's our recommendations, because now you're causing more problems by doing nothing. And it's going to knock your system out, and it's going to do this, and then it falls back on them. But we have a system in place where if they do nothing, we have it written down that on such and such a day we recommended you do this, you refuse, so 6 months down the line, when the system fails,
You have your crisis.
we're still going to support you, but you cannot penalize us because we made this recommendation. We gave you the risk, we told you it was going to happen, and you ignored it.
Yes, from your, we had a very diverse portfolio of projects, and a successful salesperson has to know the business in the different industries. How did you go about learning the different industries so that you can successfully sell your business, sell your products, and establish those strategic relationships?
Primarily two ways. One was studying the industries and talking to the customers that I was trying to sell to. they're pretty open. You can learn a lot. Now, I've been in enough companies in enough different industries that I can get a pretty good handle on that stuff pretty quickly, maybe faster than most. So that's one thing. But the other thing is I bring in talent that knows it. I don't do this by myself. So, but what I do know is you got to have the right kind of talent that are, so if you're in this industry, so I'll give you an example. When I made the decision to go into the customer support business at that contract manufacturing company, we didn't have anybody who knew how to sell that stuff. All we knew how to do was get the stuff sent into us for repair. We had to hire a sales force. So we built a sales force of people who were in the customer support business in other companies. I think we hired about 10 people, and they became our sales force. Right? In another situation, when I was creating a whole group of divisions and new businesses in another company, we created a global sales force of 160 people in a year and a half. And these were people in country, these were people who had the knowledge and skills. So I think you're right, you have to have people who have the networks and have the connections and understand and can talk the language. But at the end of the day, the problems that I'm trying to figure out how to solve are strategic problems for the company. You don't have to be an industry expert to figure that out.
How do you keep things sustained? That, you just get something like, big business going, and then all of a sudden the market falls apart. How do you keep
The way you keep it going is the example I used with the outsourcing business. You don't sit in your laurels. Right? We started a business, it was $160 million. Our first objective in growing it was the geographic expansion. We got some geographic expansion. The next was to go into 3 new business lines. The next was to change the business model so that we could make it profitable. We're always moving. Because you're right. Anything you do today, at some, not too distant future, will wither if it's not good. Right.
We talk a lot about growing things, right, with your growing products and things within your portfolio, but it seems like one key aspect is also knowing when to get out, shutting down pieces of it.
Right.
But on a certain level, it seems like there are some challenges there on how you exit from it and the company culture show that as a positive, not as a failure.
Well, first of all, it depends on what it is, okay? If it's an individual, independent business in your company, then, the other people might have some level of interest in it, but it's only the people in that business that are really going to get affected. And if you just make a decision to sell it off, they're all going with it, right? So that's an easier thing to deal with. I can tell you that in the exam, I've sold off 5 businesses over my career. And in each case, getting the executive management team to agree to do it was not the difficult part. It was coming up with a plan on how to actually extract it and do it. Okay, because that's when you run into the kinds of things that you're talking about. But at an executive level, the decision to actually do it is pretty much it's a dollars and cents decision. So, pardon me for my back. Okay, thank you very much.